As with any job, there are many ways to get it done. We're going to provide some tips that you may not have been aware of and point out some techniques you may want to avoid so you can get the job done right the first time. First, be sure you're using the correct part. Just because it fits doesn't mean it was designed for that particular vehicle. An incorrect replacement part can affect the ride height, and an incorrect ride height can prevent the electronic safety systems from operating properly. The incorrect part can also greatly affect the handling and control, as well as the original designed ride comfort. Be sure all necessary suspension components are loosened or removed before attempting to install the new unit. You should refer to the appropriate auto repair manual to determine which components should be loosened or removed to properly install new shocks and struts on your specific vehicle. To prevent injury and/or component damage, never loosen the strut shaft nut of a complete strut unit without using the proper tools to support and compress the coil spring. The coil spring is under extreme pressure and can become a projectile should the spring separate from the strut before all the tension is relieved. We recommend replacing the shock or strut mount and any other worn parts or bolts with new to help reduce any pre-existing issues such as wear or noise and help prevent comebacks for the repair work. Prior to the installation of a new mount, it's not necessary to grease the bearing plate as it's been lubricated at the factory. Do not pry or force the new unit into place as it can stress or damage other parts. Never raise a strut into place by tightening the mount nuts or bolts. This could easily damage the threads. Always use the new hardware provided with the unit. There are specific types of nuts and bolts designed to work best with each vehicle. Sometimes they're flange bolts, nylon lock nuts, jam nuts, crimp nuts, or something different. Use a jack to bring the suspension components to the proper height for the installation. Start the strut mount nuts and bolts by hand. Tighten them with a ratchet or wrench just enough to hold the unit in place. Don't use an air ratchet or an impact wrench, as you could over-tighten the mount or damage the threads. Be sure the mounts are installed properly so the knuckle bracket aligns with the lower mounting point. For strut mounts that use a bearing, you can clock the strut to confirm proper alignment for easier installation. Lower the vehicle to the ground and use a torque wrench to tighten all nuts and bolts to the proper torque specifications. The suspension must be loaded in order to get the correct torque. Suspension noise is normally caused by something moving that shouldn't be moving, or something that is supposed to move but can't because it's too tight. Improper tightening of nuts and bolts during installation can cause noise, and most likely necessitate redoing the installation properly. It's okay if you can compress the shock or bare strut with your hands. The valving is designed to work with the weight of the vehicle and won't engage with such light force. If your new shocks utilize a stem mount, be sure to assemble the mounts in the proper order. You can refer to the shop manual to determine the correct order. When tightening, make sure there is only a slight bulge in the rubber bushings. Do not pancake the rubber bushing. Some KYB shocks will have different appearing bushings than the original equipment. These bushings have been designed specifically by KYB to perform as well or better than the original design. Some KYB strut or shock shafts may appear shorter than the original unit. This is due to KYB's sometime use of internal rebound springs. Use of internal rebound springs has been found to improve handling when cornering. Never grip the shaft with any kind of tool, especially pliers or vice grips. This can damage the shaft and cause the seal to leak prematurely. Even microscopic imperfections will cause the seal to wear prematurely. Instead, use the correct tool to hold the shaft in place. It's extremely important to have the axle supported and at the proper height when installing rear shocks. Overextending the shocks during installation can cause major damage when the vehicle is lowered to the ground. This applies to all vehicles, but it's especially important on older or vintage vehicles. Start the shock nuts or bolts by hand. Tighten them with a ratchet or wrench just enough to hold the unit in place. Don't use an air ratchet or an impact wrench, as you could over-tighten the mount or damage the threads. Lower the vehicle to the ground and use a torque wrench to tighten all nuts and bolts to the proper torque specifications. The suspension must be loaded in order to get the correct torque. Always take the vehicle for a test drive after installing new suspension components. This will ensure that the springs have settled to their correct ride height and that there are no noises or immediate issues with the installation. Then retorque the bolts after the test drive. Finally, perform a four-wheel alignment after installing new suspension components. Want to learn more? We've got you covered. Visit KYB.com.